So, just one last comment about the practice, and that is that it's very good if you can keep your eyes still. They should always be open. This is the way we were taught from the get-go, and in the Dzogchen teachings, which are the very highest teachings, they stress that the eyes should be open, because the eyes are the most powerful gateway for enlightenment, most powerful of the senses. And that's one way of putting it. Another way of putting it is that by practicing meditation with your eyes open, you're practicing how to be awake and aware for your life as you walk down the street or converse with other people, or which you always do with your eyes open. But the Chögyam teachings, the Great Perfection teachings, stress that, and they also recommend that when you're practicing meditation with your eyes open, that you keep your eyes still. You don't, if you find them moving around, stop it. Bring them back to one point. Right? Because thoughts ride the breath, and the breath moves the eyes. So when you keep your eyes still, the breath and the thoughts that ride that slow down and stop to a greater degree. So you'll find that when you have been thinking for a while, your eyes were moving around as you thought. Okay, so I find it very helpful, actually, that one. So tonight we're moving on and cutting through spiritual materialism, Trungpa Rinpoche's book, and Chögyam Trungpa. Anybody have a chance to read the chapter for tonight on Prajna and compassion? No. So I'm going to be telling you what was in it. That's all right. As many times as I've read this, it always feels like it's completely new. It's really amazing. I went over the material and made notes. So in the last chapter, the topic was emptiness, shunyata. This is the Sanskrit word. And what it's empty of is the idea that we discover that the world, reality, as we experience it, in truth, in reality, is empty of any of the ideas that we lay on it, especially ideas of good and bad. But even names, just names, table, chair, person, rock, star, the things that arise in vivid reality. And the words that describe them are just that. They're words, tags. And we tend, in our confusion, to get lost in the stories, the words. We tell ourselves these stories and they're emotion-laden, emotionally driven, and very conceptual and very judgmental. And the stories are always about me, I. How am I doing? In relationship to a whole raft of others. And that relationship takes three fundamental forms. These are called the three poisons. Because it's an imaginary relationship. It's just a story that we concoct about ourselves and about some others. And in those stories, the other is either for us, against us, or neutral. And these are the three poisons, because if it's for us, we want to pull it to us. That's the poison of passion that we exercise. And if we feel that that other is harmful or against us, then we want to push it away, and that's aggression. And if it's neutral, that's the third poison, and it's indifference. And these are the three relational modes that we can have in these stories that we tell about ourselves. But it is possible to begin to experience the world as it really is, stripped of these judgmental stories, which always have to do with a very partial, tiny version of our past and an imagined future, which never actually arrives. I mean, the future is now. This is it. This was yesterday's future. And it's probably very little like anything that any of us imagined. Which is so, our imaginings are so faint, so partial, so small compared to this huge, colorful reality that we experience in the present moment. And so emptiness is we begin to shift our loyalty from these very purposeful stories about me, the hero or the heroine, and my purpose, whatever it is, how I'm going to win the struggle, to actually living in the real world, this world, as it arises now. And that's the whole prospect of meditation. Now, the discovery of this world can be quite, of this world of emptiness, voidness, can be quite shocking, quite stunning. It can come as a huge revelation, a moment of waking up to something different, to a world that's much more vivid, because the stories we tell about the world gray it out. They make it harder to see it. It's like, when you're thinking a lot, you don't even notice where you are. You don't notice when somebody calls your name, perhaps, because you're so lost in thought. The thought grays out the world. And so waking up to emptiness is a real waking up. That's why the word Buddha means awakened one. It's a he or a she who has woken up. And Bodhi means awake. So we have awakened to this reality which is described as empty. What is it empty of? Primarily it's empty of two things. And this is symbolized by the Bodhisattva, Manjushri. He's the Bodhisattva of wisdom, who wields a sword. And that sword has two edges. And one edge cuts through... this can be described in two different ways. I'll go through the first way first, one way first, which is it's belief in I and belief in other. And one edge of his sword cuts through belief in I, because I is just a story about me, the hero. I'm my own hero, glorious me, and belief in other, which is meant to sort of augment me and make me happy, this other. And if it makes me unhappy, I want to get rid of it. And so the sword of Manjushri cuts through these two beliefs, the belief in I and other, and reveals emptiness, shunyata, non-duality, the true world, the real world. Another way of talking about it is they talk about the two veils. The veil of conflicting emotions, because whenever we believe in a self, we tell a story about a self, it's full of all kinds of emotionality, right? I mean, no story is worth telling unless there's love, hate, fear, hope, excitement, all kinds of emotion going on. Otherwise, it's a boring story. It's just what is. So as soon as we have a belief in I, there are these all kinds of emotions. And this is called the veil of conflicting emotions. These emotions are called defilements, because by having them, we defile this true world, the real world, this pure world of emptiness. We defile it with these false fictions that are full of love and hate and jealousy and pride and greed and all the rest, and the stories that go along with those. The second veil is the veil of cutting through primitive beliefs about reality. And the primitive beliefs we cut through are the beliefs, among other things, that things actually exist in some way, with a past and a future, with an ongoing, unitary, independent existence. Nothing does. Everything just arises in the present moment in complete interdependence with everything else. It's like a grid. We're in the middle of it. It's taking place right now. It's like an interlocking grid of color, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thoughts, mental events, arising very colorfully in this present moment. So we cut through these primitive beliefs about reality, that things exist, and then when you believe that things exist, there are a whole lot of other beliefs that go along with that, like beliefs that the things that exist have qualities of their own, and a bunch of others, like that one thing can cause another, and so forth. And this is attacked. There's a school of Buddhism called the Madhyamaka, which is all about showing how all of these beliefs in true existence, causality, having qualities, things having beginnings and end, things moving, things changing, that all of this can be shown to be logically, inherently, internally inconsistent and illogical. Doesn't hold water. And when you strip it away and you come down to what is truly true, what is absolutely true, it's indescribable. It's what arises in the present moment. And this is why in Buddhism we speak of the two truths, the absolute truth and the relative truth. The absolute truth, and these can be described in different ways, these two truths. The absolute truth, though, is the truth of emptiness. It's that everything is arising and passing away so fast you can't even find it. You can't point to the thing that just arose and passed away. It's already gone. And the second truth, the relative truth, is that nonetheless things seem to arise and pass away. They have no true existence, and yet things are constantly presenting themselves to us very colorfully. Putting it another way, the absolute truth is the utter indescribability of our experience in the present moment, beyond words. You couldn't begin to describe the color of this floor. It would take forever. All the little nuances and changes in it. You just put a tag on it. And the relative truth then is the fact that we can put tags on it. We can put the tag floor on it. And so the relative truth is words, which are not absolutely true. They're just sort of tags, like we write the word floor on a tag and paste it down there on the floor. One teacher I had, a man named Herbert Gunther, described the relative truth as simply a useful way to take things. It's useful to talk about the floor. We're standing on it or sitting on it, But the word floor is just a relative truth, just a useful word, like a tag, like it's useful to tag things from time to time. So here we are in the middle of all this emptiness, and it's revealed by the quality of, when Manjushri cuts through these false beliefs in I and other and reveals shunyata with his sword. That sword is the sword of Prajna. Prajna is usually translated as something like transcendent knowledge. Jñā is the root of the word to know, and pra is an intensifier. So it's sort of super intense knowing. And really it's usually translated as transcendent knowing. Transcendent because it cuts through I and other. It cuts through duality to true experience in the present moment. Prajna then is the faculty of mind that sees emptiness. And they say of Prajna that it is the mother of all the Buddhas. It gives birth to all the Buddhas. It's female because it's open, it's expansive, it's like a container. It's wide, and it's productive. It produces all the Buddhas. The Buddhas, by developing Prajna, become Buddhas. They wake up. Prajna is this sword. It cuts through the false beliefs in I and other. It cuts through the two veils of conflicting emotions and primitive beliefs about reality. And the experience of Prajna. Were you going to ask a question? Or say, make a comment?
Just any reason not to translate Prajna as wisdom, more simply?
You know, these words, these Western English words, have tons of connotations and denotations that are attached to them that come from use over the centuries in a Western context. And what's been developing among translators are conventions about how to translate these words from another culture and another system of thought in a consistent way. Usually wisdom, Trungpa Rinpoche reserved wisdom to translate another word for kind of super knowledge or, enlightened knowledge, and that word was the Sanskrit word jnana. And jnana, again, you got the word jna, like prajna, jna, and here we got jnana. Na is a nominative, so it's knowledge-ness. And that word refers to completely non-dual wisdom. You see, Prajna still is seeing something. It's seeing non-duality. But in itself, there's a quality of the Buddha, or the aspiring Buddha, possessing Prajna. Jnana is beyond that. Jnana is usually it translates the Tibetan. Here's Manjushri coming. Here he is with his sword. Rochelle's bringing him forward. Okay. I guess I have to hold him so that we can see him on camera. Here he is with his sword, the sword of Prajna. But jnana is beyond being the possession of any practitioner, of any Buddha. It is a quality of the field. It is totally non-dual. It knows it's not owned or possessed by anybody. So it's usually translated, Rinpoche preferred to translate that as wisdom, and a lot of other translators are doing that as well. And translating Prajna as transcendent knowledge, because it's the knowledge of non-duality. The bodhisattva, the person at the middle level of the path, awakens to emptiness and discovers that this world is actually not two. It's non-dual. It's beyond this and that. It's beyond I and other. That these are just fictions that we lay on it. And that discovery is the discovery of Prajna. Jnana is a quality of this field, and that's usually translated as wisdom. Thanks, Rochelle. And the Tibetan for that, for jnana, is yeshe, which means, again, you see the Tibetan for prajna is sherab. Sherab means, the word she is, again, the root of the word to know in Tibetan, and rab means, and is an intensifier, means really intense knowing. Whereas the word for wisdom, when we're translating wisdom, is yeshe. And yeshe means she again, to know, but ye means primordial, before time, before beginning or end. It's primordial wisdom, primordial knowing. See? But tonight we're just really talking about prajna, because prajna is the quality, has a path quality to it. And at the middle level of the path, it's the quality of discovering that I and other are fictions. so that we can begin to shift our loyalty from the stories that we tell ourselves as we walk down the street, these anxious, hope and fear-driven stories, to simply being awake in the present moment. Now, what comes along with that is that we begin to appreciate the utter interconnectedness of everything as it arises in the present moment. And that interconnectedness is beautiful. And when we appreciate it, we can see how everything works together. This is the arising of compassion. Compassion is not feeling sorry for in the Buddhist world. What it is really the love and the way in which everything interacts. It's a constant love-making. Everything is interpenetrating. Form interpenetrates space. White and black interpenetrate each other. It's a constant act of love. And compassion is the appreciation of that we begin to develop. We begin to actually see it and appreciate and love it. The world as it arises in the present moment. It's beautiful. It's vivid. It's totally interacting. Endlessly. Productive. It's gorgeous. And it produces in us a kind of warmth, a warmth for this world, a liking for the world as it arises, in all its glory, in all its ugliness and beauty, and everything, and the dog shit in the street, the cruelty of some person, the beauty and the kindness, all of it is arising in the present moment. And it can produce a warmth in us, a generosity, warmth and generosity. That is what goes to make up compassion. And compassion is only possible when Prajna reveals emptiness. And then when it does reveal emptiness, compassion comes along with. It's right there. These are the two that go together, Prajna and compassion. Prajna, the word for compassion in Sanskrit, is karuna. Nyingje in Tibetan. And Nyingje is a very interesting word. It means noble heart. Nying is the heart and Je is a honorific. So it means noble heart. It's noble because there's such incredible appreciation for the phenomenal world as it arises in the moment. So Prajna and compassion. This is the topic of this chapter. Now, I just want to mention that as we begin to experience this, and I'm sure that everybody here has, and does when they remember to come back. And that experiencing of it, there's a subtle valuation that can go on, where you say, am I experiencing it? Yes, I am. Ooh, I'm a good person. This feels a little stale. I've been here before. That's where you're grasping it. And that's because of the, what's the word I want? The unstoppable tendency of the practitioner, the student, to be spiritually materialistic. What Trungpa Rinpoche talked about. This is a quality of the path. It's why at the middle level of the path, when you're appreciating emptiness, beginning to understand prajna and compassion, karuna, nonetheless, you're not a Buddha. Why? Because there's this feeling of me and my wisdom, me and my progress, me and my improvement that is still going on. That has to fall away. And the way that falls away is when you begin to realize that it's another fiction. The whole idea of self-improvement, of progress on the path. It's another fiction about me, I. Because this world as it arises in the moment is real. We don't have to construct fictions about it. We don't have to create little programs of how we're going to become more aware. All we have to do is wake up to the fact that this is actually the real world. It's what Trungpa Rinpoche called shifting your loyalty from the stories that we tell about me and my self-improvement to what is real. He called it shifting your loyalty from samsara, which is confusion, to nirvana, which is reality. So that has to fall away. Now on the Bodhisattva path, they say it falls away, that self-appreciation, that appreciation for emptiness, for me and my spirituality. It falls away, this is so Buddhist, in 18 stages. 18. But I think the metaphor that I've been taught that is particularly a good one. They say it's like an empty bottle of perfume. The perfume, you see, is samsara, confusion. And the fact that the bottle is empty, well, that's the voidness. That's shunyata, right? But when you hold it to your nose, you still smell the fragrance of confusion. That's what happens when you appreciate emptiness, shunyata. You appreciate it because it's in contrast to the suffering. So you have to have the suffering there a little bit in order to say to yourself, ooh, now I've got shunyata, now I'm getting some prajna. Isn't that great? And then there's always this feeling like, maybe I don't really have it, and there's this I. And the cure for that is this slow process that we have to go through, for some people it's fast, of waking up to the fact that this world, as it arises in the present moment, is the real world. It's really real. And the rest of it, all the stories we tell about ourselves and it, are just useful ways to take things, and not really true. I want to say this, that so prajna, at this middle level of the stage of the path, is the faculty that sees emptiness. It's the faculty that sees through belief in I and other. And we experience it as a kind of clarity. When we come back, we can rest in this present moment, and there's tremendous clarity and vividness. Edges can be a little sharper, colors a little brighter, sounds a little more vivid, smells, tastes, all of it. That's prajna. Trungpa Rinpoche said that while at the middle level of the path, prajna is the sword that cuts through confusion, the belief in I and other, the two veils. When we move into the enlightened stage of the path, the Vajrayana stage of the path, prajna is curiosity. Curiosity about the phenomenal world. You see, at the middle stage of the path, we're very concerned with the absolute truth. We want to learn that everything is empty. That's absolute truth. It's right here in this present moment. It has no substance. It's arising and passing away. Absolute truth here in the present moment, beyond words. At the Vajrayana level of the path, we get over that. We get over this stage of becoming free of suffering. And now we're living in the real world, and this is the world of the Siddha, the enlightened one who possesses great power. And for that person, prajna becomes intense curiosity about the world, and falling in love with the beauty of the phenomena as they arise and pass away, and tell us messages of all kinds of what they are, and what they're doing, and where they're going. I remember Trungpa Rinpoche, when he died in 1987, and the 80s were Japan's heyday. The ascendancy of Sony and Matsushita and, which was Panasonic, and all this technology that was coming out of Japan. So he said that when he died, he didn't want to come back as a teacher. He wanted to come back as a Japanese scientist. That's an expression of, I think, of that kind of love of the phenomenal world. An explorer.
Explorer of the phenomenal world. Didn't he make up society based on it?
He did. He did.
Explorers of the phenomenal world.
Exploring the phenomenal world, right. Right. He was all about that. Do you remember we had the whole things of, there was yun. Yun is the quality of wealth that you can find in certain things. I have no yun on. That statue has a lot of yun, that gold quality, especially when it's contrasted with a more austere environment around it. Then the yun really pops. He used to take his students on yun expeditions to go buy clothes that had yun. And they go to clothing stores, you remember that? And look for, if it was men, look for ties that had yun, And if it was women, it might be jewelry or a pin or just clothing that had yun. Endless exploration. He also called that resting in retail. And it's really true because, when you're searching for yun, it's like, for instance, if I go to the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I walk through with my ordinary mind, I'm walking along and it's very subliminally I'm saying, I like this painting better than that painting. This one's not quite as good as that. I like this artist better than that artist, this sculptor better than that. And I'm constantly judging. I can take about an hour and a half of that and I'm exhausted. But you can also go to the Met, and you need to learn how to do this. You need to be taught. And you can go and look for yun. And then you turn off that judgmental mind, and you're just letting stuff come in. And I can go for hours that way. It's really, it's amazing. Yes? Rochelle wants to say something.
Well, Rinpoche used to talk about how to go shopping. You go into a store and you stop, and then you just take a view, look around. And then you don't look for one particular thing. You just take the view, look around, and then you'll see something will call out to you. There's always one thing. And then that's, I guess, the yun, or you walk to that particular thing. And then you find it. It could be like going into a dollar store and finding beautiful red carnations for $1 a bunch. That could be you.
Which she did.
Or for instance, the frame on Trungpa Rinpoche's photograph. I got that in the dollar store for $1, and that has beautiful yun because it's a gold of India, the dark gold of India. And it doesn't matter what anything costs. It's all about the yun. And when someone once said to me, well, how do you know it's yun? And then she said, just explain to me how this is yun. And that's really, you could do it, but it's kind of like a sense of things.
Just to let the listening audience know, yun, there's a whole teaching about yun, and this comes really into the Shambhala and pre-Buddhist teachings in Tibet. And yun is actually a substance which can be found in the ground, supposedly. I don't know anybody except Trungpa Rinpoche who's ever found it, and it's green when you find it in the ground. But then there are objects that have yun. Gold is a natural yun thing. Although, if you get too much gold all sort of clumped together, it loses a lot of its yun. So as an example of that, if you go into the Egyptian room at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it is chock-a-block full of gold. And it gets very hard to see yun because there's too much. It needs a little contrast. It needs to be shown off. It needs to be displayed, as it were. But other things can have you on a beautiful tie, that a man might wear. And men don't even wear ties anymore, but we used to. And all kinds of scarf, a gorgeous scarf can just glow with that quality of wealth and magnetizing people. I want to keep going just to finish this. Trungpa says, compassion contains fearlessness because it's just here. It's this beautiful, incredibly beautiful arising and passing away of the phenomenal world, utterly interconnected. Everything is dependent on everything else. And it's fearless because there's no fear. It's just doing it. And it's also marked by tremendous generosity, compassion. When one feels this appreciation for the world, there's no sense of self. There's no sense of self-aggrandizement. One can open to the world. He says, it is the fundamental nature of compassion that transcends the animal instinct of ego. And it might be necessary for each one of us to go through a lot of giving up, a stripping away of our egotism, the egotism that clings to self-importance, a particular image of oneself, an idea of what is in one's interest, money, love, fame, all these things that ego clings to. And it might be a very humiliating and painful process to come to this state of mind, this true state of mind of emptiness and compassion and prajna. Because we have to give up a lot of ideas that we have clung to over the years. Finally, I'll just mention this, that there's a third principle. And that is that when one begins to live in a world, this real world, full of clarity and warmth and generosity, then one begins to behave in a very different way. And one is no longer being driven and informed by our selfish ideas, but rather we're in responsiveness, in response to the world around us. They call this is the third principle of a Buddha, and it's called skill in means, or skillful means. And what it means is that an awakened person, a person who's living in this world of compassion and clarity and interconnectedness, and is no longer acting out of personal self-aggrandizement, can behave incredibly powerfully and skillfully for the benefit of all, him or herself and others, simultaneously. And this is called skillful means. The Sanskrit for it is upaya. Tibetan is tup. And it's the third and the last quality to come. It's the most difficult. And it involves the greatest giving up of ego to develop skill in means. Because in order to do that, you have to give up any kind of self-consciousness, any kind of self-aggrandizement about me, like I'm going to do something good. That gets in the way of it. That destroys upaya. Upaya is sort of the last extension of egolessness. And when it develops in four modalities, what are called the four enlightened actions. That an enlightened person or an awakened person is constantly acting for the benefit of other beings in these four ways, and basically helping them to wake up. First, by clarifying situations. That's the simplest way. That's the first action. These are called karmas. Karma literally means action, not just cause and effect, but in this context it means actions, the four actions of the enlightened person. And the first one is to clarify through understanding. The second one is to enrich through generosity. So if a person is suffering, you might give to them kindness, wealth, food, courage, like we do with Tonglen. The third one is by creating a situation that magnetizes, that seduces, that draws in everybody, and that leads them into the path of awakening. And the fourth one has to do with violence. That sometimes violence is called for in order to act for the benefit of beings. I remember when Trungpa Rinpoche talked about this years and years ago, in the Q&A, someone asked him, can you give an example of enlightened violence? And he said, Christ throwing the money changers out of the temple. That was a good one. But there's a lot more besides that. And in the Q&A to this chapter, there were a couple of really things that leapt out at me. Someone asked him, what is the difference between compassion and love? And he talked about false love. You know, because basically compassion and love are very close to being the same thing in the true sense. But then there's the false sense. And in the false sense of love, he says, we would like to be someone else's child, or we would like them to be our child. And it could be an individual, or it could be an organization, or it could be an institution, you know. But we want to sort of own it, or be owned by it, owned and protected by it. He says, the great mother, without which we cannot survive. These two patterns of either being the mother who nourishes the child or being the child who's nourished by the mother. These two patterns apply to any life energy which has the potential to entertain us. How about that? To entertain us. So when you find something entertaining, it can sort of take care of you, or you can sort of co-opt it and take care of it. He says, however, there is another kind of love and compassion, a third way. Just be what you are. Do not reduce yourself to the level of an infant, nor do you demand that another person leap into your lap. You simply be what you are in the world, in life, with great dignity and without asking anything of the world around you, with, what's the word I want? It's sort of independence, strength. Huh? Not making a nuisance of yourself. You used to tell us that all the time. Don't make a nuisance of yourself. So, I think that's it for my talk. It was wonderful going through this material. It's really a privilege. I think at this middle stage of the path that many of us are on, where we're beginning to feel that we're beginning to understand the teachings, Prajna is an immense sense of clarity. It's very natural. whenever we come back from dreams, you realize you're dreaming and you just come back, and this world is clear. It's like there's a lot of air.
I like your use of the term tags, in terms of, using words as tags, and I think it's interesting in two ways. One is because I feel like we are very we're really into tagging these days, right? In modern society, we like to tag. We tag our Instagram posts. I do a lot of post writing on websites on using WordPress, which is and when you create the post in WordPress, you write whatever your article is, or you post whatever the picture or the video is, and then you have a space where you can put tags in, and the tags help people search, right, to find whatever the topic is. So you put in keywords as sort of tags, and I think it's a really good parallel between when you look at the message or the teachings, right? Like you're using words and some of the difficulties in translation, right? You have a bunch of words that a bunch of tags, but those tags are very inadequate when trying to actually understand the article, for example, or to describe the article. You can do the same thing with pictures or videos, and like we tag an Instagram photo, but there's so much more to the photo than just that word.
Sure.
And in a way, right, all words, all language are just tags for existence, right? The existence, there's an infinite amount of information in reality and in existence, and the best we can do is tag, is come up with these very, very small, very short, words to describe what is infinitely complex. But it's very useful.
But it's useful.
Yeah.
It's useful. Pick up the knife, and cut the butter. It's useful. Well, I didn't make this up. This is Tibetan.
Oh. They use the term tags?
Yes. The word is namdak. And Milarepa inveighs, he rants against the namdaks, because the namdaks seduce us into thinking they're real, these tags. Like there's a real knife, or there's a real floor, or there's a real person, we because the tag is static, it's limited, it implies an existent thing, when in fact what we experience is a constant fluxing. So yeah, they call it tags. It's not my contribution.
When I was in high school, I had a friend, very, very smart guy, he liked to point out that, we were still in the stages of learning vocabulary, right? We're studying for the SATs or whatever it was, and, vocabulary mattered, so you're constantly learning new words. And his point was that, with every new word that you learn, you're actually becoming able to describe things. Your ability to describe the universe is enhanced, right? You're actually able to describe it better. But what we didn't go to the next step which was that no matter how many words we ever learned to describe, to the universe with, we would never actually be able to encompass it in the words that we were.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Yeah, not even close.
It's a very long WordPress article, the universe, and there are only so many tags.
Sarah?
I also think that's interesting when you think about how, they say that different languages have different modes of thought. That, if you learn a new language, you're actually thinking differently. And I think that really coincides with how, with the teachings, you really, it's important, the teacher-student relationship, to understand what each needs in order to progress or deconstruct or whatever you want to call it. But I just, because so the right words really, it makes sense to me that in the moment you have to figure out what are the right words because what's the right situation, what's the right thing to do in the situation because words are inadequate and it's hard to translate. I don't know. I don't think I'm making any sense anymore, but
I think so. Yeah.
It's interesting what you're saying because as an artist, one might do something visual. As an artist, someone would do visual and then words. How do you actually give a title? And it has a lot of what you're speaking about because of the different languages. And it's actually, to me, one of the enigmas as an artist when it comes to naming my work. Because I don't think about a name before I do my artwork.
You don't think the name's what?
I don't think of what I'm going to name a piece of art. But when the public wants to see something and you have to curate your own work, then one needs to be able to give either untitled, so there's no projection, or like what comes up. What's the, like when you're asked, what's the title of your piece?
Maybe the title's either another work of art or a piece of the work of art. Another creative act. I studied several languages in school. One of them was Chinese. And I also studied Latin. And these two languages are very, 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 very different. Latin is very precise. It's highly inflected. So you conjugate verbs. There are different tenses of verbs. And nouns have cases that change with their function. The first word you learn in Latin is agricola, which means farmer. And agricola is the nominative case. It's when you use it as a subject of a sentence. And agricolae is the possessive case when you talk about the farmer owning something like a horse. The farmers, it's like apostrophe S. And agricola, with a long A, is the dative, which means like, give to the farmer, you give something to him. And agricolam is the accusative. You do something to the farmer. You kick him or you I don't know what, feed him. Maybe feed him might be dative. But so there are different functions, and then there are different tenses. There's the present tense, the past tense, the future tense, the pluperfect. The past perfect, and I don't know what else. And all of these have different forms. Now you get to Chinese, none of that. There are no cases for nouns, 0. There are no endings for verbs that indicate time. If you want to say, I went to the store, you have to use a time word. You have to say, I go to store. There's also very few articles. There's this and that, but there's no a or the. And you say, I go to store yesterday. So it's a very different kind of communication. And especially if you get to pre-1911 written Chinese, which is even more abbreviated and terse, to say the least. And words tend to have much wider ranges of meaning. Many more denotations and connotations than in our language. So the language is very, very different. And yet, we're all living in the same, well, we might be living in the same reality, who knows? But the language is there to describe what is fundamentally indescribable. It's just a different way, and it creates a different experience. You know, a very different experience. I mean, pre-1911 written Chinese is a thing apart. It's really, it's beautiful, but it was a reason it couldn't be spoken. It can only be read, and it was very difficult to read. So it was the province of the upper wealthy classes only. And so when Sun Yat-sen overthrew the last dynasty, one of the things that happened was that they began to write in the vernacular, in the spoken language, to make the written language more accessible to the common man. Same thing happened in Italy, you know, with Dante and after. Began to stop writing began to write in Italian instead of all in Latin. But the pre-1911 Chinese is so different. It's like almost like a code. It's beautiful. And geared to poetry, not geared to science. Very, very difficult. So language, yeah, shapes our reality, doesn't it? It really does. I mean, you know, I even think the sounds of language, the sound of it, helps to form character. You know, the romance of French and Italian, you know, the guttural quality of German, and the tonal quality of Chinese, you know, it's all tonal. Anyhow, that's not quite germane to, well, it is germane to emptiness, because it all has to do with seeing the world beyond the stories we tell about it, but still using language, and usefully. Pass the butter. We need to be able to say that. Can I help you?
Maybe that's why Rinpoche taught elocution. Say that. Maybe that's why Rinpoche taught elocution.
Maybe. I don't know. You know, my wife, who was his sister-in-law, Tessa, used to call it electrocution.
Especially if you were the one being electrified.
Right.
But Rinpoche also said that communication is the key to world peace.
To world peace?
Mm.
That sounds about right. So, maybe we ought to end now. I just sum up. We're living in this very clear world, which is the clarity of Prajna. You know, when we come back from our dreams. And this world is completely interconnected. And when we let our hearts touch in on that interconnectedness, we begin to feel the compassion and the generosity, you know, of this enlightened mind, awakened mind, bodhicitta. And finally, I think it takes a more or less painful process for each one of us. It could be more painful for one person, less for another, depending on our karma. But we have to be stripped of those things that we say about ourselves. It has to be this way. You know, this is the way it has to be for me in order for the world to be okay. Because it's like when we do that, when we say, I have to be a certain amount, have a certain amount of wealth. I have to be loved. I have to be famous. When we do that, we're inviting those things to be taken away. It's just like if you set yourself a goal, you invite obstacles. Right? It does. It happens that way. So I think, Trungpa Rinpoche in this chapter, he emphasized a thing that he's emphasized throughout the book, which is that there is a giving up process involved. There is a coming back to a kind of humbleness and a giving up of the greatness of me that has to take place, and it can be more or less painful, depending on the individual. If a person is very invested in me, it's going to be painful. And if a person is less so, it could be quite easy. And so they say about people on the path that there are some people who've, by virtue of their past karma, will get it just like that, And they're called instant realizers. All they have to do is hear a word of Dharma, and boom, they get enlightened or they wake up. But for most of us, it's a bit of a slog, I think. A painful slog.
Well, maybe if we put it on Instagram.
I worry a little bit about the whole thing with the internet in this way. I was reading a wonderful author, Naomi Klein, when I have time, reading her book called No Is Not Enough. And she's talking about the rise of a phenomenon which she calls, or maybe somebody else calls, I don't know, empty brands. And what it has to do with is the fact that, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when you talked about a company like Apple, like Ralph Lauren, like Ford, you were talking about a big industrial complex with workers, tens of thousands of workers and plants and money invested in machinery and production and product, right? And these companies, Procter & Gamble, they were very proud of their products. They advertised them and they were their products. Today, those products are being made wherever they can find the cheapest labor, and it moves continually. You never know when you buy something from this one brand, whether it was made in Thailand or Vietnam or China, and what's being sold is the brand. The brand is everything now. The brand and the style that the brand represents. And she talks about or she just mentioned in passing, what do they call what's Facebook? It's a social media, as being opportunities, and Snapchat and all the rest, for people to create their own personal brands. That's what we're doing on these social media sites. We're creating a personal brand and selling it, marketing it. A lot of people are, many who use it. It's an interesting insight, and it's so easy to do, with your own website, your own, with ego. Yes, I think so. Me.
I do it all the time.
You do it all the time?
Unfortunately, I think I see that in myself.
Yeah. She regards Trump as the ultimate empty brand because he's selling his name throughout the world, and becoming president just increased the amount of money that he can get when he sells it, and people are buying his name and slapping it on real estate developments and paying him millions of dollars. And so he's monetizing the presidency that way by selling his brand. Interesting. Well, we should end. You ended the talk. Goodbye, everybody.